Well, in the session last week, I talked about intellectual structures that are used to analyze and organize information and to organize communication effectively. Then, in the first session of this week, I examined specific aspects of critical thinking that help explain the course text. You have an assignment due today, and the assignment makes use of those sessions last week and this week in the text, and the assignments will be marked according to these sessions. So you're going to get feedback from your assignment in terms of these issues that I've been lecturing about and that help give more context and detail to what the course text says. In the first session this week, the podcast that I posted on Wednesday, I introduced 8 types of common intellectual errors, what's known as fallacies, and I introduced strategies in critical thinking that are easy to apply. This session, I want to build on that previous session by showing how the terms for critical thinking, the strategies for critical thinking that I introduced in the podcast this week can be specifically applied. And to do that, I want to look at examples from past assignments from students. So let's begin with the issue of the definition of terms and clarity of assumptions as important in critical thinking. If the terms aren't defined, then you can't be sure that you are using the terms correctly. You can't be sure that you are using the terms in the same way as your readers, and the result may be errors and miscommunication. If there are hidden assumptions, and those hidden assumptions are wrong, hidden assumptions in the reasoning, hidden assumptions that are wrong, then the conclusions may seem sensible, but be wrong. And I'm going to give you specific examples of that idea. So, by way of example, in the past, I have given students in my courses like this on professional writing an assignment to prepare a hypothetical professional report for the Board of Governors of this university. And the Board of Governors is the real decision-making power in the university. The administration makes recommendations, but the Board of Governors has the power to agree or not. So the Board of Governors in this university decides on contracts to outsource services for the university, such as parking and food services. The assignment that I gave the students and the purpose of the report that they were writing as the assignment was to analyze rationally whether the food services at this university are in the best interests of the students and give evidence to support that. So it was an assignment that was in the realm of experience for the students. Now, does that assignment sound simple? Does it sound easy to write an assignment of whether the food services on campus are in the best interest of students? It's not hard for students to form an opinion about the food on campus. And there may be a sense that everyone agrees on that, or everyone should agree with a straightforward opinion on that. Complaints about food are a common social discussion. But It's not as simple as it seems. And that's where the critical thinking comes in. It's not as simple as it seems. You know the old phrase, look before you leap. That phrase, look before you leap, means basically don't jump to conclusions. Don't be hasty. So those students got the same lecture that you did on critical thinking. And when I looked at the assignment, it seemed to show there was a sense in the students doing the assignment that they knew the answer instinctively and just had to argue what is common sense. If something is common sense, why bother to explain it? Why make an effort to explain something that's common sense or common knowledge? So, for example, it's common sense that the sun rises in the morning and the sun sets in the evening. So it is common sense that the earth does not spin, and it's common sense that the sun revolves around the earth. Common sense. Okay, you know, that's wrong. That common sense is wrong. It's based on observation. It seems so obvious, but now we know that is wrong. The sun does not revolve around the earth. It's actually the opposite. The earth revolves around the sun. Common sense was wrong. So, given this example of this assignment and the application of critical thinking to that, and the use of the importance of defining terms, what does the best interests mean for students for food on campus? What does best interest mean rationally? How do you define interests? How do you define best in the phrase best interests? Well, best is a term of comparison and evaluation. If one thing is best, it means that there are other things that are worst. And so you choose what is best and you avoid what is worst. Best is a term of comparison and evaluation. And to do that comparison and evaluation properly, it requires the establishment of rational criteria and a ranking of choices in terms of worst, better, and best, in terms of what is more important and what is less important. So what are the criteria in the definition of the term? What did students do in this assignment? How did the students apply critical thinking for this assignment after they got the same lecture as you did on critical thinking? Well, most of the students assumed that anything that students want is in their best interests. They assumed that what a person wants is what a person needs. So, by analogy, if you are a parent and your child wants to eat cake and ice cream every day, is what your child wants what the child needs? Is cake and ice cream every day in the best interests of the child? As a good parent, are you going to give your child what your child wants or what your child needs? What is in the best interests of your child? Another analogy, if you are a doctor and you're trying to cure a patient, is the cure what the patient wants more important than the cure that the doctor decides is best? Is what the patient wants always in the best interests of the patient? Does the patient always know what is in his or her best interest? Another analogy, if you're buying a car, what is more important? The color of the car or how safe the car is? What is in your best interest in buying a car? Getting a car with a color you like or getting a car that is safe? So in this assignment on critical thinking, it was crucial to define the term best interests and explain the rational reasons why something is better or best. However, a portion of the class, in doing the assignment, jumped to conclusions based on what they thought was common sense, and then they tried to prove that these conclusions were true because they're based on common sense. So, what did the students actually say? Well, some of the students said, in doing this assignment, what is in best interests for students of this university in terms of food is shorter waiting times when students are rushing to class. And those students typically said, well, you have 5 minutes to get to class, and if the lineup takes you 20 minutes, that's bad. The students who said that, none of them actually said, if you come to class 20 minutes early, the lineups are short. It's a traffic jam, okay? You know from observation that the lineups for food services will be longer just before class. Anyway, some of the students said what's in the best interests of students at this university in food services is shorter waiting times. Other students said what's in the best interest of students in food is more variety in the food. Other students said what's in the best interest of students are longer hours of operation when there are few students on campus. And other students said, typically international students, said that special ethnic food for international students is in the best interests of students. Now, all those answers assumed that convenience is the criteria for what is most important and in the best interests of students. And the implication was, the assumption was, it was convenience, and they didn't bother to explain how they arrived and justified rationally that convenience is in the best interests of students in food services. Another group of students, when they were doing the assignment, said the crucial criteria in the best interests of students is cost of food. And some students in that group said that the prices for food on campus were not affordable. However, typically, the students who answered that way did not define what affordability means. What actually does affordability mean? Some students said the prices of food on campus are too expensive. Well, how do you define what is not affordable, what is too expensive? You need some sort of empirical data support that. This was all based on common sense of what is affordable and what is expensive, without the terms being defined, without them being justified rationally. So, if you just joined, can you mute your mic, please? This is a recording being recorded right now. Please mute your mic. So these students did not prove that prices on campus are higher compared to food off campus. It was common sense, and the students. Can you mute your mic, please? I'm recording this. So the students didn't prove that prices are higher on campus compared to food just off campus. For them, it was common sense and didn't need proof, and it didn't need critical thinking, even though the assignment was on critical thinking. Now, in examples I've given, you can see that when you compare the answers of the students, they contradict each other. How can the truth be contradictory like that? That is, how can there be equal multiple best interests rather than one best interest that is the strongest and most important? Can you mute your microphone, please, if you're just joining us? Edwin, I'm going to mute you. Gianna, I'm going to mute you. Otherwise, we're going to get feedback and your voice in the recording. Okay. Okay, so how can there be so much contradiction in the assignments of the students? One criteria for this assignment was what makes practical sense. And so the students who said that in the best interests of students was affordable food and it was practical, didn't explain why a profit-making food company would agree to a contract that reduces profit significantly. That is, lowering prices is not an advantage to making profit, and that was a practical aspect of the assignment. Finally, there was a group of students in this assignment who said that nutrition is most important because nutrition leads to good health, and good health is important. That is, good health is essential to human beings. In the same way as the earlier analogy I gave, when you're buying a car, what is more important? The color of the car or the safety of the vehicle? The safety of the vehicle protects human beings. It protects life. Good health protects life. So good health would be more important for human beings. Logically, good health would be more important to human beings than the length of the lineup in food services. And, you could argue that rationally. So the students who argued that good health is an important value, good health is in the best interest of students, therefore nutrition was in the best interest of student, had a solid rational argument, and those students then supported that thesis statement, supported that claim statement by analyzing the food on campus in terms of empirical values for daily nutritional requirements. That is, they could get expert opinion on the nutritional requirements of human beings, and then they looked at whether a student eating on campus could meet those daily nutritional requirements. So that was a good answer to the assignment. Good health and nutrition are in the best interests of students, and then you can examine empirically whether food on campus meets nutritional requirements. So it would go back to this kind of argument. If pizza costs less than a salad, does that mean that pizza is better than a salad based on cost? Of course not. I could look at, say, compare it to my analogy of a car. If a cheaper car with less safety features compared to a more expensive car with more safety features, is the cheaper car better? Well, it's better if your criteria is cost. It's not better if your criteria is the safety of human beings. And so again, if you don't have to wait in a lineup, does that mean that not waiting in a lineup is more important than your nutrition and health? Of course not. So why is it that some students doing this assignment did not even consider health and nutrition? Why did they consider convenience and price as more important than health? Well, part of the problem goes back to critical thinking. Part of the problem goes back to the failure in those assignments to define the terms and justify them rationally, to define what best interests means rationally and why it's justified. So you can see in some of those assignments, it looked very simple. What's in the best interests of students on campus in terms of food services? It looked like a simple answer based on common sense. No, it was an exercise in critical thinking, beginning with the definition of terms and not succumbing to hidden assumptions. Okay, next point I want to make is about facts. What makes a fact a fact? In critical thinking, an opinion needs to be supported by relevant, credible facts. But when is a fact a fact? When we start to examine that question, we find that there are different types of facts with different validity as facts. For example, is cause and effect a fact or an opinion? First of all, what is cause and effect? Well, cause and effect is a sequence in time where one thing comes before something else. And in cause and effect, in this sequence, we say that the item that comes first is the cause, and what comes after it is the effect. The cause creates the effect. A lot of time, cause and effect seems common sense. However, cause and effect is an interpretation. Cause and effect is an opinion. And we have to be careful in critical thinking that we don't confuse the data with the opinion. We don't confuse the data, the opinion. Now, scientists, if you're studying in the sciences, scientists have a phrase for caution about that. And the phrase the scientists use is correlation is not causation. Correlation does not prove causation. That is, just because one thing happens after another thing in time does not prove that the thing that comes first caused the thing that comes second. It might be a correlation that they just happen in that sequence. It might be a coincidence that they happen that way. So if you brush your teeth this morning and then go and buy a lottery ticket and you win the lottery, there's not cause and effect there. You didn't win the lottery because you brushed your teeth, or you didn't win the lottery because you have a lucky rabbit's foot and the lucky rabbit's foot caused you to win the lottery. There's correlation there. There's not causation. So we need to consider that cause and effect is an opinion or an interpretation. And we also need to consider there's the intellectual error that what is sometimes interpreted as the cause is not actually the cause. And in fact, in some situations, what we might interpret as the effect is actually the cause. So to give you a very specific example of that in terms of economics, and I take this from Paul Krugman's book, award-winning economist, his book called The Conscience of a Liberal, and I put this book in the recommended reading list for this course. Paul Krugman poses the economic question: do economic conditions cause political change, or does political change cause economic change? Which is the cause and which is the effect in the relationship between economics and politics? But let me go and give you some examples of causation and correlation, beginning with obvious ones and then proceeding to ones that aren't obvious. So, for example, suppose that every morning we observe that a rooster crows and then the sun rises. That's a sequence. Is that correlation and causation? First the rooster crows, then the sun rises. One thing happens on the other. Does that mean that the rooster causes the sun to rise? And if your rooster dies, is that a calamity because now the sun is going to rise? So you have to be very careful of your rooster. Make sure your rooster is well fed, because if your rooster dies, it's going to be calamity. Well, of course, it's so obvious there that for us now that this is correlation, not causation. Okay, another example. In the Spanish novel Don Quixote by Cervantes, a famous novel, when things go wrong for Don Quixote, he believes that an evil magician is the cause. That is, things that don't go out well for Don Quixote, the cause is an evil magician. And that seems rational to Don Quixote. Well, we find the same sort of thinking in Donald Trump, who just lost the election as president of the United States. Donald Trump reasons that if the vote is against him, that is proof that the election is rigged. That's the same type of thinking as Don Quixote thinking that what he doesn't like is caused by an evil magician. In this case, what Trump doesn't like, what seems to be against his interest, is caused by Democrats and caused by the media. And that's his explanation of cause and effect. Give you another example. Suppose you have a vase with a crack in it, and you pour water in it, and the vase leaks. What causes the leak? Does the water cause the leak, or does the crack cause the leak? Which is the cause and which is the effect? Now let me give you, those are simple examples in cause and effect. Let me give you a more complicated one, a historical example. So in the Middle Ages, Europeans believed that lice were beneficial to your health. That is, lice caused a healthy body. So you wanted to have lice on your body. And that seemed to fit rationally the observation that sick people rarely had any lice on them. So the observation was healthy people have lice on them, sick people don't have lice. It's cause and effect. That the lice causes good health. Well, the actual medical reason is quite different. The reason that sick people didn't have lice on them was because the lice left the body because of body temperature. So when people had a fever, that is, they were sick, the lice didn't like that, and the fever caused them to leave the human body. The lice returned when the body temperature was normal. So the observation was correct. People with lice on their bodies were healthy. People who didn't have lice on their bodies were sick. The observation was correct. The interpretation of cause and effect was wrong. And this time, the thermometer hadn't been invented yet, so it might be hard to observe an increase in the temperature of the body. Okay, that's a more complex example of an interpretation of cause and effect that is wrong. Here's Another more complex example, and this example comes from Nicholas Nassim Taleb, author of the Black Swan. Taleb is an economist, but his observations apply to life and politics. Black Swan is a great book to read, and this example from Taleb is cited by Rolf Delbelli in The Art of Thinking Clearly, which I've also put it on a recommended reading list. 2 books that help us in understanding critical thinking. Well, the story here is that people who are good swimmers have lean, muscular bodies. So does that mean that swimming gives you a lean, muscular body? Does swimming cause a lean, muscular body? Is that cause and effect? Or is the actual situation that people with the potential to be good swimmers, people with lean, muscular bodies, wanted to be swimmers? And that second option is called selection. That is, people select what they will be good at, what they will have a good chance of being successful is. And so selection is a factor you want to look for very carefully when you're trying to decide on cause and effect. So the answer that Taleb and Delbelli are giving is that that people who have the potential to be good swimmers because they've lean, muscular bodies choose the sport at which they will be successful. It's like a person who's short in stature deciding to be a jockey. Being a jockey doesn't make you small. People who are small self-select to be jockeys because they will be successful. Here's another example of selection, of how you analyze cause and effect. And of course, cause and effect will be a very important issue in research and evaluating the quality of the research. So this is an example that comes from Rolf Delbelli in his book, The Art of Thinking Clearly. And has to do with MBA, Master of Business Administration. Do people who graduate with an MBA have a higher rate of success in business? That is, does getting an MBA cause success in business, or does it actually work the other way around? That is from selection. Do people who with a higher potential and higher interest to be successful in business choose to do an MBA? Do they choose to do an MBA because they have a higher aptitude and potential for business, and they have more personal incentive to it? So you can see that Rolf Delbelli in his example is examining the principle of selection and cause and effect. Okay, now I'll give you an even a really complex example, where as people without any great expertise and experience with economics at this point, it'd be hard for us to make a decision what is right. In 2010, 2 economics experts proposed that when a country's debt rises above 90% of the gross national product, economic growth slows. Cause and effect. High debt causes slow growth. And that argument was proposed by 2 economics experts, Reinhardt and Rogoff, and it was published in the American Economic Review in 2010. And that research paper was widely cited in political debates over the effectiveness of austerity in fiscal policy for debt-burdened economies. That is, what is the economic risk of debt, and what kind of economic policy should a country pursue? Now, we're at a point right now with the coronavirus pandemic having economic consequences, and politicians having to make economic policy. How do you combat an economic downturn caused by, or apparently caused by, the pandemic? Well, these two researchers, eminent experts, proposed that high debt causes slow growth. Consequently, you want to reduce debt to increase economic growth. Well, Paul Krugman refuted that, and I've just referred to Paul Krugman a minute ago as an expert economist, and I put one or two of his books on this course. So that argument was refuted by Paul Krugman as the causality backwards. And Krugman showed rationally that slow economic growth causes debt to increase. Now, like I said, for those of us who aren't expert economists, that's a really exotic idea, and we're likely to be persuaded by the common sense factor in cause and effect. That is, if somebody tells us high debt causes slow growth, and experts say it, and they publish the research, we might say, I'm not an economist, but that seems like common sense. And Paul Krugman refutes that and explains that the causality is the interpretation of the causality is the problem. Now, when we're evaluating research, interpreting causality is going to be very important, and we need to examine what exactly is the principle of causality in this research. It's going to be particularly important in medical research because that has to do with the health of human beings. And in medical research, it's going to be very important to distinguish between data on correlation and data on causation. I could go into examples of that, but let me move on to other issues. Aside from noting that typically research posit cause and effect, and we want to make sure when we analyze that research that the principle of cause and effect is valid and it's not simply correlation or coincidence. Another area of fact is our surveys and statistics. And when we have something that's a number, we seem to have confidence that numbers refer to facts and that there's no opinion involved in a number. But statistics and surveys can be affected by the context. And so we have to consider that. Statistics and surveys can be affected by the context, and they can be affected by interpretation. So the context can be who is surveyed, how diverse those who take the survey are, when the survey took place, and what questions were asked in the survey. So if I go back, for an example, to the assignment of students that I mentioned previously, that is, what's in the best interests of students for food on campus. One student in the assignment said, quote, "In a survey I conducted of students, the majority had complaints about food services." So this was a survey, the student said, and the survey was proof that the food services are bad because the majority of the students had complaints about the services. Well, in this survey, the student did not say how many students were surveyed. And when I typically ask students that, if they say they did a survey, typically a student will say 10 or 20 students were surveyed. And that's just not statistically valid. And then I'll ask the students, what type of students did you survey? Were they diverse? Did you do equal men and women? Did you do domestic students and international students? And typically the student will say, well, I surveyed my friends. And that's, that's probably a like-minded group. So there was a question here of when the student said the majority of students surveyed had complaints about the food services as proof that the food services were bad. The student didn't say how many were surveyed and whether the number was statistically valid, how diverse those were surveyed. That is, if you only surveyed men complained about the food services, what if women had a different view about that? Your survey, in that case of just surveying men, would be selective and not representative of the larger group. And there's the question of what was the survey question. That is, what was the question is, do you have complaints about the food services? Or was the question was, how do you rate food services on a scale of 1 to 10? How valid is the question to get the answer that you need? Also, in this student's answer, the word complaint was not defined. That is, were these little complaints or big complaints? Also, the student did not define what a majority is. Is a majority 50% or is a majority 80%? So sometimes I might get a student assignment saying 51% say such and such, and that's proof. But if 51% said one thing, that means that 49% said the opposite. So that's pretty evenly balanced. That's not a majority when 49% contradict. So I'm giving those examples to indicate that even though surveys and statistics give us confidence of being facts, they may be far from having the validity that we actually want. And the fact that we have to understand the statistics in context, we have to understand how the statistics are interpreted, whether the interpretation is valid or not. So typically, in some statistics, we may have an average, and an average is a benefit in judging a situation. An average gives us a central reference point, but an average does not accurately represent the whole. It doesn't represent the range. So when you have an average, you should realize that most of the data will not be average, but will be a range plus and minus around the central reference point of the average. So to give you an example, when the Provincial Assessment Office in BC notifies homeowners in Kamloops that the average value of a home in Kamloops has increased 6% over the last year. That's an average. That does not mean that the value of every home has increased by 6%. It's an average. the reality is there will be a range of plus and minus over that reference point of the average, and the average will vary in different parts of Kamloops. In some parts of Kamloops, the percentage average will be higher. In some parts of Kamloops, the average will be lower. So that's an illustration that averages, statistics, and surveys, the conclusions are interpretations, and the validity of the data depends upon the validity of how the data was collected and how the questions were asked. There are simple ways to really recognize really quickly a failure in critical thinking, and we can recognize it in the language that we're reading, or the language used for communication, and whether or not we are using quantifiable terms or relative terms. So, for example, the following phrases are relative terms: many, most, few, more, less, the majority. Those are all relative terms. They are opinions and not facts. So right away, we want to be careful of those. Okay. So, for example, in the student assignment that I've been talking about, where students were asked what is in the best interests of students on campus, one student said, quote, "Considering the large number of international students that Aramark serves on campus," Aramark is the contractor for food services. So that was a premise that the student was making in the assignment. That the premise was that there's a large number of international students, therefore the food should cater to international students. Now, large number is an opinion. It's not data. And the data is missing there. So the actual number in the last couple of years is that 30% of students on campus are international students. So is 30% a large number or a small number? Well, it means that 70% are not international students. 70% is larger than 30%. Saying that 30% is a large number is an opinion. It would have been more accurate for the student to say, considering that 30% of students on campus are international, and then gone on there. Another student said, according to my research, I'm quoting, according to my research, some students eat once a week, some eat 2 to 3 times a week, a small percentage eats rarely, and the majority eats regularly. So this shows that Aramark is feeding the majority of the students. Well, it actually doesn't show that. In fact, if you look at the language, it says that a small percentage of students eat rarely. Well, that seems rather doubtful, because if you're not eating, you're not getting sustenance. Some students eat 2 to 3 times a week. Well, presumably students need to eat more than 2 to 3 times a week because they'd be starving. So what the student thinks he or she is saying is not what they're actually saying. And the phrase that begins, according to my research, what research is that? Where is the data that demonstrates the rate the students eat on campus? It was likely, ask 10 people or 15 people. Anyway, you get the idea that these statements really do not qualify as being valid. Let me move towards a conclusion here. What are some strategies to apply critical thinking in terms of facts? Well, typical advice is don't say something is a fact until you can prove that it's a fact. It might be an opinion and interpretation. Label, first of all, the information as a claim, and then test the claim with evidence. Is there solid evidence for treating the claim or the information as a fact? When you have no proof yourself that information is a fact, you should attribute that information to a knowledgeable source. That means that you're not claiming the information is true, you're claiming that the source says the information is true, and then you will disclose to your audience the qualification of the source. That is, you will show that the source is a reputable expert source, which should bolster the belief that a reputable expert source will give accurate information. If you have doubt about the source, if you have doubt about the quality of the information, make it clear that you are not claiming that something is true. Indicate the doubt about the validity. And this is one point that the text makes. Don't put your reputation at stake. Show your critical thinking by showing the source of the fact, the reason for believing the source is accurate, and if there is doubt about the source and there's doubt about the information, indicate the source. And this is one of the reasons for citation, that that you need to reference clearly where the information comes from. You need to name the source, and that gives the audience the chance to judge the reliability of the source. For that, you need to be careful when the source has a vested interest. I'm going to dig into this more deeply in a later session of this course, where I examine the text on the uses and examination of sources. Okay. You should, I'm going to give you now some quick instances of where a red flag should go up and indicate to you there are critical thinking terms. Okay, so when should we get a red flag? When someone, you or someone else, makes use of invisible and unconscious assumptions and premises. So you need to identify the assumptions and premises and make them clear, and evaluate the reliability of the assumptions and premises. Be careful when a source you use anecdotes as proof. Anecdotes are not proof. Be careful of opinions that are not supported by evidence, where evidence is lacking. Be careful where there's misuse of evidence. And so I've given an example of that in cause and effect. That is, correlation is not causation. Claiming causation might be a misuse of evidence and a misinterpretation. The red flag should go up with lack of experts or lack of qualified experts. The red flag should go up, use of the past to predict the future. A lot of information is intended for use in prediction. That is, how should we invest our money based on the past? That's a prediction of the future based on the past. What's the best career for you to pursue? What's the best education for you to pursue? Those are all predictions because you're not in that career yet. And predictions are very valuable for us, but we want them to be rational predictions. Another red flag is lack of relevance. The information is interesting, but the information is not reliance. Be careful of arguments that rely on common sense or conventional wisdom. And finally, be careful of succumbing to social inhibitions. Social inhibitions are kind of social rules for the harmony and cooperation in society, and sometimes they become an obstacle to critical thinking. That is, you don't challenge information because of the social inhibition that it would be feel embarrassing for you to challenge information.